According to a leaked CIA report obtained by the Washington Post, it sounds like Netanyahu may be deliberately extending the Israeli war in Gaza to save his own political fortunes. This is par for the course for an elected politician, no matter what side of the ocean you're on, apparently. We're going to break down just why he's doing it, what is going on, and what this means for the wider war in Gaza. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So the best write-up I could find is actually from an Israeli newspaper, hence the janky-looking font. But the overall picture is that the Washington Post was able to quote anonymously military officials and officials in the White House who actually saw some intelligence produced by the CIA that Netanyahu actually wants to drag this war out as much as possible or even expand it, and not for Israeli security interests, but simply to preserve his own political fortunes, right? The idea being that Netanyahu's base is right of center and they really support a wartime prime minister, right? He formerly served in the Israeli Special Forces. So Netanyahu himself, a strongly pro-right figure who is relying on this war to get people to rally around him. The core ideas, of course, as you guys know, October 7th, right? This was Hamas's most spectacular attack, right? Literally, it was a spectacle. And the most devastating attack in modern history against the Israeli state, at least by Hamas. And the failure, right, of the Israeli government and the Israeli military and intelligence services is hard to overstate. Again, think about just the scale of material that Hamas had to amass in order to launch this attack. And when voters put Netanyahu in office, just like any democracy, when you put a right-wing ex-military leader in office, you're saying that you're willing to accept their militaristic demeanor in exchange for a military level of effectiveness, right? Whether you're Jair Bolsonaro, the former paratrooper who became president of Brazil, or you're Netanyahu, right? Your electorate brings you on to bring effectiveness into the national security space for your country. And so the fact that Netanyahu failed in his most important mission in allowing October 7th to happen is a political hot button issue. And the only real way to survive politically for Netanyahu is to continue to make sure that Israel has a wartime footing, right? That the Israeli population is looking in front of them at the threat, right? The problem is Hamas is the problem with sort of throttling the Israeli operation is that Hamas has time to learn. If you are on the premium site, combatvetnews.com, I just did a breakdown of Hamas combat footage, right, that they released. And the thing that kind of blew my mind is how much their tactics have evolved. We're seeing them use very sophisticated tactics, including IEDs, including civilians and placing explosives on tanks, stuff that it took the Iraqis years to refine those tactics in the Iraq War. Hamas seems to have done it in months. But even more troubling, they seem to have identified weak spots in the Merkava's armor where the better Hamas teams are actually targeting the tank there. And so when we look at the map, you can see really just how much the IDF has slowed their efforts. You remember, it took about 2 weeks for them to fully encircle northern Gaza. And in the subsequent 2 weeks, or in the subsequent, 2 months, they've done very little else. Right, or not much else. They've been fighting in Yan Kunis in the south. They've been securing some major roadways linking north and south, but that's really about it. The operations have slowed, and the problem is that for the IDF, it means that Hamas has more time to get smart. They have more time to find the tactics that work. They have more time to trial and error, right? And it's disappointing that the elected leadership is actually creating a less safe military, is impeding the military's operations in order to achieve a political end. And unfortunately, I think it's actually pretty clear that this is indeed the case. In fact, the DIA had one of their assessments leak. I'm sort of suspicious that these leaks are true. I think actually they are deliberate releases by the White House, and the White House goes, well, it was leaked. It wasn't an official statement. You weren't supposed to see it. But the White House wants to tell the Israelis things that that cannot come from an official U.S. mouthpiece as an official statement. And so instead they're releasing these reports or leaking them to the press so that the Israelis can know and see, hey, this is what the U.S. really thinks of you, right? So the DIA said that actually the IDF probably wouldn't be able to succeed if it actually had to fight both Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So, the fear is that Netanyahu may want a long, protracted war. The fear is that he may actually get his wish, and that would stretch the IDF impossibly thin and actually create an environment which is where neither front can really achieve a decisive victory. And that's kind of the fear, I think, among a lot of people here. It's important to remember that, of course, Hezbollah is a level up from Hamas. Tens of thousands of well-trained fighters, professional, more military-grade missiles and rockets. Hamas, in contrast, has older weapons, homemade weapons, not really that competitive against a force like the modern IDF. But Netanyahu really he needs to protect himself. And unfortunately, we've seen he's been willing before, I think. He seems to sometimes behave in ways that protect himself at the expense of the Israelis. And here's one perfect example of what I'm talking about, right? Netanyahu scheduled around the 90th day of the war a meeting with his cabinet that was meant to discuss what they call the plan for the day after. And the day after, right, you may recall in the U.S.-Iraq war in 2003, the day after was something that after the U.S. invaded Iraq and swept aside the Iraqi military and deposed the Iraqi government, the whole process took, I think, about 2 months. And then the U.S. suddenly was sitting atop a country of Iraq with no government. And we realized we didn't really have a good plan for afterward. We had a really, actually, an unbelievably terrible plan. The war went on for another 18 years after that happened. That's how bad the plan was. And so I say that because it is a military essential activity to plan for the post-war operations as soon as you begin the military operation itself. Especially when, listen, did you really think that Hamas was going to beat the IDF? Did they really think that they were going to beat down a million-man army with fully modern equipment? Like, no, they weren't, right? They're fighting. They're fighting because that's what Hamas does. That's what they did on October 7th, and that's what they're going to do now, and that's what they wanted to do. But they are never going to actually win. So the idea that Israel, of all countries, was going to go into their war with no post plan is preposterous. But Netanyahu ostensibly trying to set things right by having the war cabinet make this plan for the day after. Well, unfortunately, Netanyahu's political allies balked at the idea that you would need to plan for a day after, right? These far-right parties, literally one is called the Jewish Power Party, and the other one is the Religious Zionist Party. And I actually can't, some of their stances are pretty crazy. These two right-wing parties are essential members of Netanyahu's coalition, and they said actually they are protesting the very notion that there is something to plan for in Gaza, right? The fear, of course, is that planning for a post-invasion Gaza would mean giving someone governing the Palestinian territories, namely Palestinians, and they absolutely can't stomach even something as impotent and corrupt as the Palestinian Authority. The right-wing parties just can't stomach it. And so, of course, Netanyahu, a decisive wartime leader, bowed to their nonsense and canceled the war cabinet's planning. So it's just, this war is going to keep going for no reason other than to achieve political objectives of the Israeli leadership, which is just truly Brilliant. Anyway, if you want to check out that Hamas combat video, it's on combatvetnews.com. YouTube, of course, won't let me show you any uncensored combat footage. It won't let me show you at this point. It won't let me show you any combat footage, period. Full stop. So you can check it out in the members only section of combatvetnews.com. This is also the best way to support the channel. You guys know YouTube will not basically run ads on about, at this point, it feels like most of the video ideas I have to be really, really selective about what I release and even the individual pictures I show. So if you want that footage and support the channel, check it out, combatvetnews.com. Link is in the description. Any one of the tiers will get you access. And of course, a huge thank you to all the members of Combat Vet News. I really couldn't do this without you guys. Be sure to hit like and subscribe on the video. Tell the YouTube algorithm that I am not a scammer. And I'll see you guys in the next one.